Alright guys, welcome back to yet again another video. This is going to be my Group B predictions heading into MLG Atlanta. This is the first video that you've seen so far of the group series. If you guys want to, I will have a link down in the description to my Group A predictions. Once Group C and D do come out, I will have those kind of down there as well. As time does go on, I'll update them down in the description. So yeah, I'm going to be going over Group B today. For those who don't know, if this is your first time watching this, I will be casting at MLG Atlanta, so it should be an awesome time. And while I'm also kind of prepping myself, I'm also kind of trying to do my best to kind of let you guys know my thoughts kind of coming into a lot of these matchups and what a lot of these matchups mean, because, you know, granted, you'll see a team versus another team, but a lot of people don't really realize the amount of preparation, or the amount of just repercussions, I guess, or results that really could come from a lot of those things. So like I said, today in this current video, we're going to be discussing Group B, and in Group B, the teams are going to be consisting of Splyce, OpTic Gaming, Team Allegiance, and Evil Geniuses. Now, straight up, I'm just going to be straight up with you. This is probably one of the easier pools for me to predict. And no, this is not my group of death, because I'm going to keep saying that every time until it comes up which group is my group of death. But first team to be talking about is going to be Splyce. Splyce is the best team in Europe when Orbit isn't around. Just to put it lightly, I like Splyce a lot. Very talented team when it comes down to their 2Ks and whatnot. But every time they get matched up with Orbit, it's just that they have a great matchup versus everyone else. But when it comes into Orbit, they just can't get the job done. They can get it done in a grand final, but since they were coming from losers, they didn't end up winning the tournament, which I'll talk about in just a second. Like I said, without question, top 2 European team, one of the recent powerhouse squads formed for Infinite Warfare. For those who don't know, the roster basically consists of Josh and Bance, who are already on Splyce. And you also have Mad Cat and Jared coming from what was supposed to be the God Squad over on Millennium for Black Ops 3. Like I said, it was consisted of Mad Cat, Jared, Tommy, and Swanee. Of course, we saw some good results from them at times, but in the end, when it came down to Call of Duty XP, Swanee had some, personal issues, wasn't able to compete at that tournament, and then Miracles ended up filling in, and at the time, it really was just kind of a mess. But one major thing that kind of is surprising to me about this team was the dynamic of how it formed, right? Because when this team originally was kind of being brought up, whenever the original Splyce team, who ended up getting that second place spot at Call of Duty XP, the runners-up at Call of Duty XP behind Envious, whenever they decided to split up, which to me was a surprise, at least, the original plan for Bance, who's the captain of the team, was to get rid of Josh. I think a little bit of maybe repercussions came from that. I think maybe Bance kind of realized maybe I should keep Josh. Maybe Josh is the better player to kind of keep around, maybe the more positive player out of these guys who are left. So basically, they keep those guys. They kind of send off Joe and Rated, the other half of their Call of Duty XP duo, I guess you could say, and the roster moves on, right? They obviously realize Millennium has split up, and they pick up Jared and Mad Cat from that, the remains of that team. The communication that Josh brings, along with the great slaying power that he brought in Black Ops 3, now the support-mindedness that he has in Infinite Warfare. You look at Mad Cat's history. Everyone knows how talented Jared can be. And then Bance, who to me was in my top 10 players of all of Black Ops 3. He was that good, and that's not really happened before, where we've seen players from Europe be put in a top 10 list. At least for me, that's never happened. So this team on paper is very, very, very scary to go against. Without question, is the second best team when it comes down to Europe. Where do they relate to North America, though? That's the major question to be asking. In the one instance where they ended up going over to North America, of course, all those European teams had to go through the open bracket at MLG Vegas. They ended up making it through the open bracket. They ended up losing to C9, but beat Echo Fox and TK in their groups. They were later knocked down to the losers bracket by the EU Slayers. And FaZe, if you don't get that reference, FaZe has basically kind of made a name for themselves when it comes down to open MLG events by beating Josh and by beating Splyce and by beating whoever was thrown at them. FaZe to me is known as the EU Slayers. If you ever hear me say EU Slayers or anything like that, that's the reason why, because it seems that every time they match up against them, FaZe always gets the last laugh. So once that ended up taking place, ended up getting knocked down to losers by FaZe, they ended up actually getting knocked out later by Evil Geniuses in a Game 5 losers round 3 match, which obviously didn't really give them the best placement in the world. As far as their 2K placements have been going so far, they've actually won 2 2K tournaments up to this point. They won 2 actually in a grand final versus Elevate. And for the first matchup that actually took place between Orbit and Splyce, the best 2 teams in Europe, in the last 2K, actually, Splyce ends up getting 3-0'd by Orbit. So, like I said, it's an awkward matchup, because I promise you that if it was Orbit and Elevate in the grand finals, at least Elevate would have took a map off of them, or something like that. But it's just whenever Splyce goes up against Orbit, it's just they can't get it done. So I'm going to do my best throughout this entire event or this entire event, kind of leading up in my preparation to realize and understand why it is such a bad matchup for Splyce when it comes to them versus Orbit. Because a lot of other teams, they can take at least a map off them. They can maybe send it to Game 5, but I don't know. Splyce just can't get it done, man. Which obviously means and gives the place that Orbit is just that much better than them in the long run. One more match that we can talk about is actually Gfinity London, where they actually had a great performance. Only thing is they ended up losing to Orbit twice. However, they ended up taking the first series versus them in the grand final. So basically how it went was Orbit was knocked down, or Splyce was knocked down into the losers bracket, one of the first rounds, I think, of actually the Gfinity London tournament. Then getting knocked down to the losers bracket, I think getting maybe 3-0'd or something like that. And then they kind of make their way back, and they beat a few teams here and there. They beat some of the top European teams. They finally make it back to the grand finals, and they actually take the first best of 5, which is very, very surprising to see. No one was really predicting that to happen. Then they kind of ran out of gas a little bit, I think, to say the least. I mean, when you played in a loser's bracket run all of Championship Sunday, and then you finally get there, it's probably not an easy thing to do. I think that was also a 4-day tournament, so it probably wasn't the easiest thing to get adapted to. The one thing that I see is an issue for them, might be maybe one of the leading factors, in my opinion, as to why they might be not performing at the very top level, is their communication, right? I think when you look at these players based on their previous history, and you look at their communication, maybe from just like their Twitter or from whatever, previous history, you look at Josh. Josh, to me, is the best European communicator in the game without question. He is constantly calling out, constantly letting his teammates know. He's a very fast talker, so it's kind of funny to see him communicate, but he is very, very good at letting his team know, letting them be aware. And now that he's kind of a support player, he kind of hangs in the back, he's kind of being aware of the entire spectrum rather than being like an AR in the back. His calls are only going to improve when it comes down to this current lineup, I think, or at least his current play style, really, for right now. You have Bance, who's a pretty good communicator. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He's going to be kind of focusing on slang anyway, so he doesn't really need to call out as much, just basically kind of confirm who's dead, where they're coming from, what angle they're coming from, where they're spawning at every time he dies. But Mad Cat and I think especially Jerd are going to be kind of issues for them in communication. And when you're playing against top-level teams, when you're playing up against not just Orbit, but playing up against the entirety of North America, and maybe even a few ANZ teams if they can make it through the open bracket, it's not going to be easy whatsoever. And your communication, your overall slang, everything has to be on point. If whoever wants to win this tournament, or just make it even through groups, pool play stages, you have got to be playing at a highly consistent rate, because this, to me, is easily and potentially could be the most competitive event in Call of Duty esports history, just from the sheer fact of who all is here. Like, everybody is here. Everyone is at MLG Atlanta, for this $200,000 tournament. So if your communication isn't on point, if you have one little error in your gameplay that could cause something to be an issue, you could find yourself getting knocked down. You could find yourself losing to one of the teams that are going to be in this pool. You have OpTic Gaming, you have Allegiance, who can make a pretty big surprise, and you have Evil Geniuses, who could also do the same. Next team we have is going to be everyone's favorite team, OpTic Gaming. So OpTic Gaming, as of late, have been on a major team scrum grind. Heading into this game, they weren't really focusing as much as I would have probably liked them to be. Prior to the weapon drop being taken out, to everything, they really weren't scrimming that often. They weren't really worried about going to PSX because they obviously weren't going to be going to that. And they really just weren't practicing as much as I would have liked them to. They did not have a whole lot of practice coming into MLG Vegas. Due to that, they ended up finishing off with a 5th through 6th placement. Didn't even make it out of group play at MLG Vegas either. I think they ended up going 1 and 2 in groups. They ended up losing to E6 3-0, and I think they ended up losing a Game 5 to Rise, which if that could have gone a different way, obviously, they could have made a much farther run in the tournament. And like I said, one S&D kind of ruined a potential run that they could have made. However, getting put down in the losers bracket, I think they kind of realized, maybe kind of focused up a little bit more. Because they went through a pretty impressive losers bracket run for the most part. The losers bracket run consisted of beating Complexity 3-0, beating Elevate EU, I believe. Yeah, it had to be 3-1 because I ended up casting over that. They ended up beating E6 3-1, so they get the revenge on E6 due to the group play loss that they ended up suffering. And then they end up going up against FaZe. To me, what is probably the best series of all time that didn't go to Game 5. Like, I don't know if that's ever been a thing or not, but this to me was probably one of the best series I've ever seen that did not see a Game 5 S&D. It was constantly back and forth. It was such a great series. If you guys have any free time kind of coming into this event, or you kind of want to get excited for this event, go back and watch that matchup between FaZe and OpTic. Actually, maybe even the 2K as well, but also at MLG Vegas. It was a fantastic match, constantly went back and forth, and in the end, it was obviously FaZe who ended up closing it out, and that kind of, knocked down OG for the most part. But like I said, can you imagine? They wouldn't have been in losers had they won that one game 5 versus Elevate, and maybe they could have progressed on and whatnot. So obviously, or versus Rise. I'm sorry, I think I said Elevate. I meant to say Rise. So obviously didn't have the greatest performance in MLG Vegas. Now we're going to take a look at some of their MLG 2K results. So basically, the results so far have been first, 5th through 8th, 3rd through 4th, 5th through 8th, 2nd, and 1st. So fairly solid placements, kind of inconsistent at times. You see 1, then you see 8, 4, 8, then 2nd, 1st. So it's kind of like, kind of goes back and forth, which, to be honest, has kind of been OG's normalcy for the most part. It's kind of been their inconsistency. They've kind of been plagued by inconsistencies in some way. Some notable knockouts they've suffered throughout the 2K so far has been their longtime rivals in online play, which has been E United. They end up losing to E United in the January 15th 2K 3-1, and then they end up losing to Envious 3-0 actually in the January 22nd 2K, and then on the January 29th 2K they also lost to E United yet again in a Game 5 scenario, which they'd get their revenge a little bit later in the most recent 2K actually. But one thing I want to point out though is that in both losses that they suffered to E United, which was 3-1 and 3-2, and the one that they lost 3-1 on January 15th, Breakout was map 4, which was the settlement to which one that they would lose. So basically, for those who don't realize, Hardpoint is game 1 and game 4. So meaning that if they lost to United 3-1, that has to mean that Breakout was map 4, which is the map that they lost. Breakout is by far their worst map. Throwback is by far their second worst map in Hardpoint. And a OG who struggles in Hardpoint has always been an issue. I've never been a fan of OpTic Gaming when they say we are great at S&D, our hardpoint isn't great, and our uplinks are pretty good. Because, for me at least, OpTic needs to be reliant when it comes into their hardpoint game. I think that's, without question, that needs to be a thing. Like, I don't know if it's just more practice on the map, kind of being focused. I know they have a hard time getting shower control when it comes in to Breakout especially. It's always a major issue for them, is the first and second hill. But they have to be working on those maps like crazy coming into this. Maybe you get a scrim partner, maybe you get someone to kind of work on these things with you. Maybe you get an analyst and try to work on things like that. But I've never been a fan. I think OG has been at their worst when they were kind of inconsistent in their game types. Because in Black Ops 3, not to go on a little bit of a rant here, in Black Ops 3 toward the end of the game, the issue that OG always suffered, at least in my opinion, toward the end of the game, whenever Envious was kind of on their run, they were losing tournament after tournament after tournament, was that there wasn't like one game type that I looked at and I said, oh, OG's supposed to win that, or that's OG's best game type, they have to win that, because it was almost at different times during different series where they would shine. Like you'd see, oh my gosh, they destroyed them at Search and Destroy in that one series, and then we come down the line and we go, oh my gosh, they destroyed them and then uplink later on. It's like there needs to be some consistency with this lineup, and to me, a team in past who has been good at S&D, fairly good at uplink, and not the greatest at hardpoint, it's an issue. And when it comes down to the randomizer that we currently have in COD, when it comes down to map selection, it's obviously a difficult thing because you're not doing map vetoes, right? You're not getting rid of your worst maps kind of coming into it. You don't have to worry about not playing Breakout the entire event because it's kind of based on a random system. I don't know how it's exactly decided or anything like that, and I'm really not worried about it. I would obviously love to see vetoes come into play because we have a perfect map set up for it. However, it's very, very dependent on whenever they face off against some of these top teams. If they get some of their worst maps on them, that can be the reason why they get knocked out of a tournament. So to me, they need to be working on their hardpoint game coming into this tournament, especially on Throwback and Breakout. Breakout 1000% especially. But like I said, this team has been grinding a lot. I think they definitely have improved a crazy amount since MLG Vegas. It's almost like two different teams, really. And to me, they're MVP so far into kind of progressing as a squad and kind of learning a lot about other teams, because you do see at times where they have switched up strategies, or they've tried to kind of counter teams at times, and the most valuable player to me has been Formal, without question, regardless of what the stat line has shown, regardless of what any of that has shown, because I don't even take stats when it comes to online 2Ks. Their main caller now, which is Formal, and then he's also kind of like a lead analyst for them. Every time, for those who watch OpTic Gaming play and scrims and like that, every time you'll always hear them say, Formal, what's the strat for this? Or what are they normal to doing? What's their payloads for this map? What's this? What's that? When they face off against a certain team, Formal always has an idea of what to expect coming into each game. And if you don't have a player like that, that could be a major problem. Or if you don't have someone who's constantly being aware of that, that could be an issue. So imagine if Formal wasn't on this lineup and they didn't have anyone to do that, along with the fact that they're struggling in hardpoint. If they don't know what certain strats are when it comes into Search and Destroy, that could be a problem. And that's the one thing that I say it's not smart to rely on search and destroy as like a major game mode for you, is that anything can be pulled out. You know, there's so many different strategies in Destiny that you can pull out. Hardpoint is kind of a straight, you know, run and gun type of game mode where you're going to kind of get an idea as to what team is kind of doing what. There's not a crazy amount of strategy that goes into Hardpoint besides, you know, rotating correctly and watching cuts and, you know, obviously winning your clutch gunfights and stuff like that. S&D is a different beast because you get first blooded, you back up, you bait and switch. You know, there's so many different things that come into an S&D game that to me, it's just, it's very nerve-wracking for me. It's kind of like a shaky little bridge that OpTic is kind of moving on, where it's like, you know, they could fall off, but, you know, maybe they don't. Who knows? Next team we have in Group B is going to be Team Allegiance. To me, without question, one of the biggest question marks coming into this tournament, let alone this group. MLG Vegas ended up having a 4th place finish, which is fantastic, really. I wanted to kind of go in depth with their MLG Vegas run because I wasn't super familiar with how they were able to do it, because this team kind of comes out of nowhere and they just absolutely dominate a good amount of teams. Because I remember watching very early team scrims, actually them and OpTic playing, and I think they were just scrimming hardpoints, and this was prior. This is before the OSA ban. This is before the Synaptic ban. This is right after Weapon Draft. I think this is like one of the first weeks after Weapon Draft. These two teams are playing, and Allegiance just kind of rages after 2 maps of playing and scrims. They're supposed to play all the maps through. Allegiance just rages. They're just like done. And then after I saw that, I was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to be doing a whole lot of research coming into Allegiance for MLG Vegas, just because of that sheer fact, right? Because they're not expected to do well, and I'm really not think they're going to make anything happen. However, though, that wasn't the case. Was it a lucky tournament? I don't know, because clearly they're not a good online team. But to me, are they a good team at all? That's the question to be asking right now. But speaking on land, though, MLG Vegas, kind of in depth as far as this team is considered. Basically, ALG ends up beating EG in their group. Basically, it was LG, EG, Cole, and then Allegiance themselves who were in this group. Then beating EG in Game 5. Then beating Cole in Game 5, which to me should have been a little bit earlier, based on what happened later. But coming into this, it wouldn't surprise me if Cole would have beat them Game 5, because I didn't really know what they were going to produce. They ended up losing to Luminosity Gaming 3-1, and I believe it was like a really close tiebreaker in this group, but because of maps 1, ALG, and or Allegiance and Luminosity Gaming, it makes it easier to say that, ended up moving on. And then shortly after this, I believe in winners, Allegiance actually ended up beating E6 3-0. And for those who don't know, E6, after coming from the open bracket, 3-0'd and then 9-0'd in overall map count, their entire pool, which was absolutely unprecedented. One of those teams being OpTic Gaming, for God's sake. So that was incredibly surprising to see. Once ALG beat E6, I was like, okay, this tournament doesn't make sense anymore. They literally lost to Cloud9 in the Game 5, which Cloud9 went to like 96 Game 5s throughout this entire tournament. I believe they ended up actually getting their revenge on Luminosity and actually took them out of the tournament in Game 5. Which to me was incredibly surprising to see as well. So they take out Luminosity Gaming. They take out, Enigma 6, which to me easily could have been top 7, top 8 teams in the game at the moment. And they end up losing to FaZe in a 3-1 fashion. But I think they definitely caught a lot of teams off guard. I mean, based on online scrims, they started to improve heading into MLG Vegas, but I don't think anyone had any idea what they were going to produce once the event started to kind of go on. And I think, in everyone's opinion, Allegiance was without question the most surprising team at that tournament. The question is, though, will they perform when it comes down to MLG Atlanta? Was it a one-trick pony? Was it a one-time thing? I personally think it was, but we'll obviously if they can kind of prove me wrong. One thing that I want to point out with this team is that Deserto ended up doing a article, or kind of like a little interview on Sinful during the tournament, I believe, and basically he brought up a really interesting thing, and he kind of laid out how the team works. Basically what he said was that Remy and I are the glue, meaning Sinful. Remy and I are the glue of this team, kind of mending what goes on with this composition, because for those who know of Royalty, whenever he came out in AW, when he was on the Epsilon NA team, no one knew who this Canadian kid was, played on a 15 sensitivity, no scuff, no nothing, destroyed everyone. Right, he just destroyed everyone. No one had any idea what this guy was capable of, and just wrecked everybody. And we all know how fast he kind of plays. He has has a very high reaction time, so it's very difficult to kind of play against him. And then Mochilla has been kind of known throughout his career as kind of like a slower, hardcore AR player as far as AR in previous titles. I mean, because everyone's an AR player basically in this game. but kind of like a slower AR player, doesn't really move crazily about the map. He's going to have kind of a higher KD for the most part just because of how slow he plays, but he's very consistent, can kind of call out pretty well, but he can be a little bit of an issue as a teammate because he doesn't like to practice as much. That's been a known thing and always been a prominent thing because he likes to play other games and stuff like that. So Sinful and Remy, to me, are definitely the major factors when it comes down to this roster. I was actually looking at a few of their stats and whatnot, and not a whole lot of them really met up to anything. It would be like one player had a weak S&D KD, but they brought it up in the hard point. Then one guy would have a terrible uplink KD, but he had a good S&D KD. It didn't really add up to much. So Allegiance, major question mark on them for this tournament. Will they prove themselves again? I think they'll definitely prove themselves, not as much as they did at MLG Vegas. I think they'll definitely catch a few teams off guard. Still, I think there's something there. Like there's some stuff there because they didn't. If they would have just beat E6 and then just kind of lost it after that, if they would have had a good group run and then not done anything after that, I can kind of get maybe it was like a one-time thing. However, though, I think it will be a good Allegiance team, just not to the same extent they were at MLG Vegas. And by that, I mean probably not going to get out of this group. So we'll see how that ends up working out. Next team we have is going to be, and the final team actually of this group B is going to be Evil Geniuses. Now, Evil Geniuses to me is a very interesting roster as far as their composition goes as a lineup. For those who don't know, this roster consists of Nameless, it consists of Study, Havoc, and Nagafen. Nagafen coming from the third place team at Call of Duty XP, playing under the names of Elevate. Prior to that, playing under the name of TR. Ends up getting dropped, heading into the old Rise. Technically, the new Rise Nation players drop him, and it's going to the organization for Looney, which is obviously unfortunate for him. Havoc ends up coming from Cloud9 and then later Complexity after not having the greatest kind of run toward the end of the game. Very talented player. Many were saying that he was probably one of the best rookies, kind of in some cases, maybe besides AW, but one of the best rookies of Black Ops 3. And a great guy as well. You also have Nameless and Study, that duo ship that runners up at Call of Duty Championships and Ghosts. A great duo together. To me, I think it was kind of like a one-time thing for that duo to be together as far as having a whole lot of results. But the reason why I said that they had interesting play styles, or the reason why it was an interesting composition, is that the players, both Naga and Havoc, both kind of play a similar role to me. They kind of play, maybe not the same weapon back in Black Ops 3, but they kind of played a similar style, which is kind of like I'll say an S&D. Like they're specialized in S&D. Havoc is more of a Slayer. Nagafen was kind of like a roamer, kind of like maybe like an Aches role, kind of a lurker in some cases. Their main game type is S&D. Havoc was pretty good at hardpoint as well. Then you also have a guy like Study, who's kind of a similar play style, more of a designated like hardcore AR. But also kind of plays the same thing in S&D. The pre-sniper for the team, used to getting those first bloods, kind of hanging in the back of the map. Also a pretty good clutcher in that as well. And then you have Nameless, who kind of is one of the first times of him kind of being the leader of a team. He ends up coming from Complexity throughout Black Ops 3, who had a number of different personalities on that roster, having guys like Parasite and Miracles and stuff like that. And obviously the team doesn't really work out in the end, sadly. And he was always kind of credited for being the issue to that team. Then he goes over to OpTic Gaming and just completely reevaluates and kind of just like rejuvenates that lineup. You Study, Spacely, and Saints for that team. And then coming into Infinite Warfare, it was actually supposed to be Spacely, Study, and Nameless. You were supposed to have a team. Like they're supposed to like form together for MLG Vegas. And it was a really big surprise because due to not keeping those core three together, they end up losing their spot. And then since they end up getting Nagafen and Havoc, it was like Spacely's now gone. Now they've lost their pool play spot, and now they're going to go through the open bracket, which was a major issue for them. So it was obviously an interesting decision, and it's more or less kind of worked out for them. I think the chemistry is definitely there. It's just trying to work around the old play styles and trying to make something new is the case for them. Now that I've given a very large summary about them, but now we're going to talk about a few of their tournament placements, some of their 2K performances as well. MLG Vegas, the online qualifier, they end up losing to Echo Fox in top 16. A lot of people expected them to make it. I personally did not. I was very skeptical of the Evil Geniuses team originally being formed. Like I said, I didn't really like the composition of the players coming together. I just didn't like how they were kind of put together at the last second, or rumored at the last second, and their play styles together I just didn't really think would work well. MLG Vegas, they've been having a top 8 placing, which is good, especially coming from the open bracket. They actually end up trading games versus ALG at Vegas. In their group, they actually end up winning that one 3-1. And then the losers, actually, Allegiance would later beat them in Game 5. So you can kind of see a little bit of a rivalry kind of going on in this group. So it'll be very interesting to see how these two teams kind of combine against each other when it comes down to their pool play, because, of course, they've kind of traded maps when it came to MLG Vegas. As far as MLG 2Ks are considered, this team has had some pretty decent placings for the most part, but in the end, it's a pretty solid 9th through 16th that you're going to see a high majority of the time. On December 11th, which was a completely different game, you need to kind of highlight that, they actually end up getting second place and lost to OG in the grand finals, and in that tournament, they actually beat E6, the old TGC team, which is now 3/4 of the new E United squad. They ended up taking down C9, and also, like I said, took OpTic Gaming to a Game 5. So early on, you can kind of see like they have had some very, very good moments. Then you see January 8th, 9th through 16th, lost to Echo Fox. January 15th, 5th through 8th, lost to FaZe Game 5. January 22nd, 9th through 16th, lost to TGC Blue. January 29th, 9th through 16th, again, lost to ALG Game 5. See another matchup between them and ALG. And then the most recent 2K, which ended up taking place on February 4th, they also get another 9th through 16th placing and lost to who? E6, Game 5. So to me, they have some potential to be good, but they get tilted very, very, very easily. And I think someone kind of needs to step up in the communication with Nameless. Nameless is kind of like the only mending factor, which has kind of kept this team together in high pressure situations. They're actually a fairly good team when it comes into Game 5 SSDs that just kind of where study thrives. But I've noticed in their comms a lot, it seems that like once Havoc and Nagavan realize that there is maybe a pressure in the team or that there is negativity in the team, they kind of like feed off of that, and I feel like they kind of realize those vibes are kind of coming from those two players, and then they react in that way also, meaning that overall, once they realize the negativity in the team, they don't counteract that. They kind of accept it, and they move forward with the negativity. So, like I said, this team to me can be very, very good. They're kind of like a hype team, so if they win the first hardpoint, they're pretty good to go. If they lose the first hardpoint in dominant fashion, they don't win what should be their S&D most of the time, then they're most likely going to get 3-0'd or they're going to get 3-1'd, which to me it could be a major issue for them. They're kind of like, if they come out of the gate hot, you can expect them to have a pretty decent series. They can take out some really high-level teams as well, but if you find them already having an issue, you can easily kind of shut them down in the end. So I've also been taking a few notes in their team scrums recently as well. They do have a lot of little mistakes, and it seems that when they are moving forward in team scrims, they kind of forget those mistakes that they've improved on, meaning that there was a one instance where they were practicing their uplink tosses. They're having some issues with that. A lot of times you'll see them being a little bit too over-aggressive when it comes down to hardpoint because they haven't really figured out the roles 100%. Especially with the weapons being taken out, classic weapons being taken out as well. It's not been easy for them. And then you'll see at times where they kind of revert back to that same thing. Guys, like, why are we still having issues with shooting the uplink drone? Like, why are we still having issues with, being aggressive in hardpoint? Why are we having so many issues? We've already fixed this stuff. And I think that's just the level of mentality this team really needs to have. They're also having issues with them trying to set up scrim times, which should never be a problem. Like that should be day one things that you deal with. And this team has been together since the beginning of Infinite Warfare, so that should never be a problem. They have a lot of little mistakes, but it's to me kind of like a rocky road in some cases because they can have really, really good moments, but if you catch them on their off time, or if you catch them in like a low mentality mood, I feel like they could get wiped pretty quickly. So I think as far as my pool play predictions for Group B, I'm going to have OpTic Gaming coming out actually in the first seed. I'm actually going to go with a little bit of surprise here. I'm going to have to go with an upset here or there at least once. And I don't know why I have this feeling, because in no way should this be the case. I really think that the EG is going to take out Splyce. And then I'll give you a little bit of a reasoning why I think that is. I think Splyce is a good team, but I don't think that they are ready for an OpTic match yet. I think it's going to be a very difficult one for them to face off against OpTic. And I think when it comes down to ALG, they could also get knocked down. So my prediction is that Splyce will have good matchups versus OpTic. I think they're going to have a close matchup. I think OpTic will win that one. But I think ALG and Evil Geniuses, one of them will find a way to beat Splyce and will be able to sneak into that second spot. Now, do I think Splyce is a better team than both ALG and EG? Yes, I do. I definitely think that is the case. However, though, you have to go with upsets at least once because it's not going to be 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 each time. So yeah, I'm going to go with Evil Geniuses to actually make it through. I know I discredit them a lot, but like I said, man, when they are in those Game 5 situations, they can clutch up. You give them an uplink, you give them that one respawn, they go to Game 5 S&D, they can take it. They definitely can. So I'm also going to see how Splyce does. And I know that's a major upset. And people are gonna be like, "Oh, why would you go for that upset?" You gotta at least make one, right? You guys can give me one, at least one upset. You guys can give me at least one of those. But guys, that's gonna do it for my Pool B predictions. Pool C will be coming up, and Pool D will follow shortly after. If you guys did miss my last one, make sure to go ahead and do that and check that one out. I'm gonna try to put timestamps down in the description as well to each pool when I start talking about each team, in these particular pools. So make sure to check that out as well if you are kind of skipping around trying to get a little bit of an idea as to what my thoughts are on each team. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for this particular video. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Make sure to tune in to MLG Atlanta. I'll be there. I hope you see me, and hope I see you as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys all later. Peace.